I'll change the view to speaker. Right. I assume everybody can now see me on the screen. Okay, so this webinar then is going to be around horizon scanning. I won't delay. I'll bring up the slides. Okay, if all is well, then you can see the slides. Lauren, if there's a problem with that, perhaps you'll contact me.
Yep, you're all good.
Excellent, thank you. So horizon scanning, it's become very popular recently, and we'll go into the reasons why. So this horizon scanning webinar has been set up to kind of open it up as a topic. There's a lot of misinformation around what horizon scanning is, how to do it, what you get from it. And we hope that in this webinar, we will clear up some of those issues and allow you to use this as a tool in your organization. We are a regulated organization, Barnett Waddingham, so I am obliged to put up this slide, even though what we're talking about isn't about investments so much, but I am obliged to do it by the Financial Conduct Authority. I would like to tell you a little bit about Barnett Waddingham. Barnett Waddingham is a very successful firm. It's got a great reputation, as you can see from the awards in pensions, defined benefit pensions. But over the last few years, it started to develop a very strong capability in the whole area of risk management. And the company is offering consultancy, but also a portal where, as IIRSM members, I believe you have access to, where you could go and actually download a lot of information you might need to support your risk management functions. And this presentation will end up on that portal too. So if you want the presentation, you want the slides, that will be available on the Barnett Waddingham website. So this is the meat of what we're going to cover today. As I said, I want to say what horizon scanning is, I want to say what it isn't, because there is a lot of people use it the wrong way. They use the term the wrong way. How to do it, and how you can use the results. And this is perhaps the important one, to create strategic insight for your organization. And we'll also touch on why you might want to start using horizon scanning. So let's move on to the first slide. So I did look into the history of this, and there is no universally recognized definition for horizon scanning. It's a term that came up in about the 1990s. I remember being in an organization where we commissioned an organization to do horizon scanning for us. We were a technology firm, and we asked a sister company actually to look into, do some research into what technologies were coming up so that we would be ready. It's a very simple, let's be ready for what's coming up. So it's not a defined term, it's a descriptive term for foresight, forward looking. And the reason it's not a defined term is because it's been done for centuries. Everybody's been wanting to know what's coming up. It's always been needed from early days. What's going to happen? How will things turn out? It was, where will the enemy go? All these things fit into that process of foresight. And as I say, horizon scan has just really become a name for that forward-looking foresight activity. But what's also happened is we've kind of put a little bit more structure around it. And that's what we'll cover when we get into how to do horizon scanning. Then I'm going to cut across that by saying, is there an established process which is the way to do horizon scanning, the definitive way to do it? And the answer to that's also no. It's a fairly unstructured process in some ways. It has to be unstructured in some ways. You put structure around it so that you make sure that you surface the right kind of information. But we can't say there is a definitive way to do horizon scanning. So when I get into the bulk of the presentation, what I will show you is some of the thoughts, tools, and some of that framework that you can put around your own horizon scanning activity. It's like everything in risk management. It needs to be tailored to your organization. It needs to do what you need it to do. And so all I can do is really give you the tools. Now, I would urge you to put questions in the Q&A box, as Lauren said, because I do intend to finish in time for us to address some of the questions. And I'd like to encourage you, because sometimes you'll think, oh, nobody else wants to ask that question, but quite often people do. They think, oh, I would have asked that question. And even simple questions, just put them in the chat and we'll into the Q&A, and we'll pick them up at the end. So return to this slide then. So if there's no definition and no set way of doing it, the challenge is, how do you know you've done it properly? And that is a fair challenge. There is no easy way. My answer here is by the output you get and the degree by which you and your peers believe you've gained the insight that's available. Now, I've said insight that's available and not the insight that you need, because when we're talking about foresight, we're talking about looking into the future. The information you may need to gain that foresight might not be there at the moment. And that's where horizon scanning and emerging risk come together. And I'll touch on emerging risk as I go through the presentation. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. So I'd like you to picture horizon scanning like this gentleman sat on the wall. If you like, picture yourself sat on the wall. That could be you looking out over there. Now you can see the horizon. There's a hill over on the horizon there, and to the left, some kind of structure. No real detail on the horizon. You just know that they're there. The big topics. So translating that into our business environments, that could be artificial intelligence. It could be outcomes of the turmoil in geopolitical circles we see. It might be a new technology. You might be invested in technology, and that might be the next generation of technology, which you and your organization have got to get to grips with. But if you look in the foreground of that picture, in front of that gentleman, you can see the trees. You can see some detail. To the left of the picture, you can see there's a river and there's boats. And that's why horizon scan has been adopted as a term. It's so descriptive. What you see close up, you're going to have more information from. You're going to be able to see some of the detail because it's close. Information would have been generated. If it's risk, it might be that there were some risk events, small signals as we call them in emerging risk, that are giving you an indication of how this is really going to turn out. On the horizon, like a detail, close up, you've got the detail. And that's really why horizon scan has been adopted as a term, because how would you describe that shift of perspective? It's a very difficult thing to communicate. Horizon scanning, lovely term, but it's a descriptive term, no definition. So the first thing, is it like this? So you're sat on that wall and you're looking forward and you can see the path. And you can see the path quite close to near you where you're the individual slats, and you can see those in detail, but you can't see the ones down the road in detail. So is it like that, a clear path? Not really. So this has that perspective that, yeah, sure, you can't see the slats on the path as they disappear into the distance. But why I say it's not like this image is because there's no one route to the horizon. You will follow indications as they arrive. So if I was to use a picture to describe that process, that path you'll follow for horizon scan, and I would say it's more like this. You found your way to the center of the maze and you've got to come out. So you look, you get some information. There's a path to your left, a path to your right. And for some reason you think, well, the path to the left looks like that needs to be investigated. So you do, and it turns out to be a dead end. And fruitless work, you generally learn something on the way. And you come back, and then you maybe go to the right. And then you move through, and there might be 3 options, and you choose the right one, and you move down, and you've discovered something new. You don't go back necessarily to look down the other path. Now, that can be a bit of an issue, because you may have passed something in that maze that you wanted. It might be that if we've hidden treasures around in that maze, you make your way out of that maze, and you've not picked up every treasure on the way. So you've lost out in some ways. So there is value in allowing this investigation, as you're doing your horizon scanning, there's value in saying, okay, let's just have a look here. And you've got to be conscious of committing resources. We're all short of resources. But there is a level where you should just let the process look. And if you see some good indications, some indications that there's some valuable information there, you can continue. And it's knowing when to stop going down what could be ultimately a fruitless path. So if we went to the left and followed this path down and hit a dead end, and it was there's another one off the side of it that we also can see as a dead end. There's no much point in going down that dead end. We clearly have gone wrong. So it's actually being sensitive to the small signals. And again, it's this idea of how you might look at emerging risk. Now, my background, I've been involved in emerging risks for some years now in previous employment, and I'm also chair of the British Standards Committee on Emerging Risk. And I participated in the writing of the new standard, ISO 31050. One of the debates we've had in there, because the way that ISO 31000, it's a TS actually, is been written, is to take ISO 31000 and build on it for emerging risk. Because ISO 31000 covers all risk. That's part of its simplicity. It's part of its simplicity. So we couldn't completely rewrite 31000 and say emerging risk is something different. And it isn't. It is a risk. But one of the areas that we had significant debate about is ISO 31000 calls upon organizations to use structured methods. If you don't know what you're looking for, if you're on this horizon scanning path, and you don't know with any precise detail what you're looking for, you're obliged to use unstructured methods. But you can put it in a structured framework. It doesn't have to be just pay people to go off and learn whatever they want to learn. That's not what we're saying here. You can put structure around how you select people who should do horizon scanning. You can put structure around where they look. And you can put some structure around when they should stop, report, and you can take that step backwards. And that's where the structure initially. But then as you get closer to the risk and you start to understand it and the information you need to manage the risks or to look at that strategy and decide what the risks are, the closer you get to that, the more it looks like standard risk management. And what we find is people then stop dropping the emerging risk label. Because we had trouble defining an emerging risk. What's an emerging risk? It's just a risk for which there's no body of information available at the time. And it might be for your organization, it might be emerging for your organization. But generally with the bigger issues such as artificial intelligence and the geopolitical, we're talking about risks that are emerging for the first time in the world. So there is no established body of knowledge. We're finding our way. People will implement AI. They'll report how it goes on. There'll be academic works. That knowledge is building, and that will be the ripe area you might look at for your horizon scanning into artificial intelligence. But we can't say it's complete. We can't say that we've acquired enough information to adequately manage artificial intelligence in society. Yeah, I've spoken about that and justified my maze enough. I'll move on now. One thing it certainly isn't is predicting a certain future or mapping a path to a fixed goal. That would be something like visioning, where you've decided where you want to be and you look at what the steps are that you need to undertake in order to get that goal. This is where people misuse horizon scanning. They might describe that as horizon scanning. It's really not, because they're really just plotting a path. Horizon scanning, this random walk of horizon scanning, this discovery, this operation of discovery is what makes horizon scanning what it is. But a lot of people make this mistake. They use horizon scanning, but in fact what they're doing is visioning, or if you're into scenario analysis, they're doing backcasting, where you decide where you want to be, and then you work back on the things you need to influence and put in place in order to get there. But not horizon scanning. So I've gone back to the first picture now, and I would like to look at it now through fresh eyes, having shared with you what we have. So look in front of that gentleman and there's a city. And if that mountain in the back there did represent a technology that is emerging in the future that his organization are interested in, and he wants to get to that point, they want to get to that goal of understanding that technology, that horizon will come close. You can see in front, there's a myriad of different paths that would lead to that path, to that area. And that's what horizon scanning really is, because as that gentleman jumps off and walks down through the different streets, they'll start to find issues, threats, might identify a region of that city which is not so pleasant to visit and needs to be avoided, in which case the path may not be direct, it might be off to the left. In business terms, that might be a ethical area of using the technology which you don't want to engage in. So you avoid those risks. That's the equivalent of a poor area in the image I have here. It might be as you approach that, you see other things that you need to pick up on the way. In the horizon in there, there's some other little black objects which you can't really see what they are, but they might be associated technologies. They might be legislation. So those little black things there, I can say that might be legislation in terms of how this new technology is going to be needed. And you want to surface that as your way. So this gentleman's path won't be, as I said, with the slats straight to that mountain. It needs to be looking through all the areas as you go, looking for the fruitful path. And that's why it's unstructured. Right. I think we've done a fairly fine job now in describing what horizon scanning is and the methods you use to surface the threats and the opportunities. So let's talk about how you might go about doing it, because that's what you really want to know. How do I do this? What do I do in my organization to implement horizon scanning methodology? There is, as I say, some structures. So you can put some notional steps. First, scope what's in your field of interest. On that image, I was talking about that mountain as being a metaphor for new technology. And in your business area, that translates into might be into implementation of artificial intelligence, moving your operations into a new country, even maybe stepping out of an old technology that's starting to run its course. There might even be some horizon scanning to do around there to make sure that you're stepping out in an appropriate way. Not a common use of horizon scanning, but it's all part of understanding what we in risk management terms call the external context. That's what we're really investigating with horizon scanning. Now, the idea of scoping what's in your field of interest is because if you leave it too wide, you'll consume a mass of resources. If you just say, go and see what you can find about this area of technology, you might find that the resources, the hours booked, just mount up. And some of the information that's coming in isn't necessarily that helpful. On the other hand, if you go too tightly and say, that's the pin, and I want you to move to the pin, as we said, you're not doing horizon scanning. What you're doing is visioning, you're going to a certain path. And the danger there is that you do fall into confirmation bias because you're looking for things that support what you're doing. It's difficult. There is no simple way to scope what you need. It comes out of a discussion. I suggest you a discussion with stakeholders, the people who are management team as to what they want to achieve, where they're going, what the technology is, what do you do, what's the core business. I had a very interesting discussion yesterday about an incoming document for private organisations called the Weights. It's a document for the Weights corporate governance code. And one of the things it says is the organisation really needs to focus and understand what its purpose is. Now, it seems strange. Does an organisation not understand its purpose? Quite often not. So part of this scope and exercise, one of the valid questions you might ask is, what's our purpose in this? Or what's our purpose in pursuing that technology or pursuing that country as somewhere to set up our, what's our true purpose? How does that fit in with the bigger things? And that will actually help you scope your horizon scanning process. But none of these things are set in concrete. So if you start off, you've got a wide scope and you start to see resources, hours being booked that aren't really leading into fruitful, you can revisit this. and tighten up the scope. Or if it's too tight and you think that you're missing stuff, you can relax the scope. This is an iterative process. So you've got your scope and you start gathering data. Let's assume you know very little at the moment. So you start gathering data and use a number of methods and capture techniques so that you've got that data in some kind of structure. Now, this is a difficult task, and I will touch on this, because what you're generally surfacing is going to be unusual types of data. There's maybe a video talking about the future of mobile telephony if you're a technology firm, and there's a video and it's useful. It raises some technologies in the universities that could be used to get more data down the same channel. But it's vague and it's pointing to the mathematics. But then alongside that, there's other information where there's a standards committee being set up to define that. So you've got a standard, you've got a video, you might have a conversation with somebody who's an expert in the field and you want to capture that. You might surface a small data set that's testing out one of the methodologies that is highlighted in the university research. These disparate pieces of data are notoriously difficult to bring into a system so that when you step back, you can understand all the nuances. And that's something we'll touch on with the latest slide. Analyze and draw insight from the data collected. So you want to be able to look at that data and analyze it. So you do need it in some form where you can do some analysis. And of course, there's a lot of data analysis capability. I mean, at Barnet Waddingham, we have good data analysis capability, as you might expect, because for the actuarial part of our business, but that's expanding to look at data in other areas too. You need to prioritize the data and the outputs. What's giving you good insight and what's nice to know, but we'll park for now. And one of the other steps that you want to do is, of course, communicate the useful outputs. And I'll describe that as intelligence. So the path we're following, it's actually outlined in a standard ISO 56006 about managing information in an innovative environment. And it says you start off with data. And of course, information where you're getting some sense out of that information. You might move to knowledge where you can apply that information in some sensible way to help your organization. But then they define strategic intelligence. And that's the knowledge and the information is a description for that class of information that's really going to give you some foresight into how things might turn out, even if they've not transpired at the moment. And that strategic that strategic intelligence is used by the boards and those who are charged with developing the future business to develop their strategic insight. And that's the process you're trying to achieve, from data to strategic insight. So as I said, we do need a bit of a structured approach. So what kind of shaping of the future are we interested in? I mean, it might be that you're a social organization and you're interested in social change. As I said, I've used the example already, technology. It might be using this technique to understand how your organization can pivot to the new ESG agenda and therefore climate change and the social aspects of ESG and the governance. It might be that you're actually trying to work out how your organization needs to respond to societal changes related to climate change and social change. Or it might be these geopolitical events which have been highly disruptive of late. We don't have a global society now. A lot of the globalization that was rife in the 70s, 80s and 90s, a lot of that's been completely damaged now by the new order of geopolitical things. So we need a structured approach. If we just pick on one topic, we could fall into that situation where we think it's all about social change and we miss technologies that are going to be doing it. If we saw, for example, artificial intelligence as a technology and we miss the social change, the behaviors, then we've fallen into that trap of being too specific with our horizon scanning. And that's why I say you've got to be wide and then cut it in if need be. It's the Christmas tree. You move out, you come in. You move out, you come in. And as you're moving out and coming in, soon you'll find that the Christmas tree is leading somewhere. You've not taken it to that point. The information is guiding you to that point. So there are tools we can use, and the most common one is Pestle. There's also Steeple. And the idea behind these, they're mental tools you can apply, and they make sure you think about each of the different dynamics that could be in there. It's an exercise that actually works alongside the way we think as humans. And you go at this with an open mind. So whatever it is you're looking at, you might say, well, what's the political dimension? What's the government thinking about? Let's pick another example. Let's pick on something else. Pay balance. What's the political situation around pay balance between genders? What's the political movement is it going to be now and in the future? Is it something we need to kind of get a bit more information about in order to understand how we need to shape our engagement and payment policy going forward? There's an economic dimension to that as well. You know, if you're going to pay people equally, I mean, part of Birmingham's problems, Birmingham City Council's problems, is because of the economic impact of looking at fair pay. Certainly there's a social and a cultural dimension, which you could explore. Technological, well, it might be that systems need some changing, or it might be that there's certain systems out there that you need to bring in that can actually help with making sure that you're reporting about your pay gap in an appropriate way. Certainly there's legal consequences, as Birmingham found. And then environmental, well, in the case of fair pay, maybe, but I don't think that's going to become a particularly big class. But you can see how Pestle makes you systematically look at the problem. It's a systems technique to look at the problem around different ways. Now, you can actually help yourself by creating tools like this, a data classification tool. You can tell, well, some of these things are really, really big, but how granular we do. Now, here's an example of such a tool that has been used. It's a tool I've used in the past. And we took the big systems of changing planet, changing systems, changing people, changing technology. You see they got broken down into different areas. And anything that we looked at, we quite often found, almost without exception, that a couple of these things would be triggered. But we look at the problem through those lenses. We look at the data we're collecting through those lenses. What's the role of system interconnectivity in terms of introducing artificial intelligence? What's the impact on pay gap of changing people, changing demographics, or diversity versus monoculture, that tension? Now, this is out of date now. I wouldn't use this as it stands now. I would, if I was doing one today, I'd recognize the importance of ESG and I'd build a new one around that ESG, and it would be featuring much more about the ESG arrangement of organizations and their risks. But this is the kind of tool that can actually help over and above Pestle to actually structure and look at that data. But then you've got to capture that data. And as I said, the problem is it's video files, it's text files, it might be an academic paper, it might be a conversation you've had, it might be this webinar that you want to put into your system. And there are mind mapping tools around which can handle this kind of data. Now, I'm not here to push any particular tools, I'll say mind mapping tools. And I've got an example there on the left-hand side. For that example, I keep using artificial intelligence. I can break it down into different elements, and then I can associate that data with the elements. There might be artificial intelligence in transportation, how it might be used to drive automatic cars, AI driving automated vehicles, that AI in transportation. But I can link it across in my mind map to maybe law enforcement. How's that going to work? I can link it across to maybe developments in robotics and automation on the right hand side towards the bottom. So I can follow any train of thought and look at what information I have in that space. So my maps, they're not everybody's perfection, but my maps are a good way of capturing, storing and analysing some of this information, because you can change your perspective and look at the data in different ways. So I would suggest you certainly have a look at my maps. So going back to what it is you're collecting, and this speaks back to how you manage the scope, how you manage your expenditure on the Horizon Scanner activity. Again, and this is a theme of this presentation. There are no exact rules, but I can give you some guidelines. Does it relate to an event, situation, or state that could arise in the future? I'm minded to pick a different example. Let's think about 4-day week. So one of the things you're looking at is, are we going to be moving to a situation of a 4-day week? There's been some trials that have shown it's actually very beneficial, that productivity goes up, employee satisfaction goes up. So could we be moving to a future of a 4-day week? Certainly there's a political dimension to that, economic situation, all the pestle parts. So in finding some data, you can ask, does it relate to this situational state that we expect to rise in the future? It might be a research paper about the benefits, the personal well-being benefits that arise. That clearly is related to the move to a 4-day week, and it would come under the well-being. Does it relate to something that could be a small signal? Now, as I said, small signals are very important with any emerging change, any emerging risk. Small signals are where we start to see something which is indicative of something that might come on. For example, we've seen some trials in organisations, big organisations, running a 4-day week. That's a small signal. What did they find? How did it work out? How did they implement it? What did the customers think? So that's a small signal that you can latch onto. So you're not having to reinvent the wheel. And then you'll start seeing another couple of big organisations do it. And to the point where actually, rather than being a small signal, it's a loud signal. This is the way we are going. This is what we need to implement. So does it relate to something that could be a small signal? I don't want to overemphasize on that, but that can be a difficult one because you see information and it just lodges in your subconscious. I've done this with Horizon Scan. You think, that's interesting, but I don't know why. Allow your subconscious grace in that respect, because quite often, subconsciously, you've picked up on something that's not in your cognitive mind. So don't dismiss it. And I'll come back to that. Does it reinforce views held, or just as important, does it challenge current thinking? This is the scientific approach that comes into horizon scanning. I don't know if people follow astronomy, but there's the Hubble, not the Hubble, the Webb telescope has produced some results that challenge current thinking that's been well established for many, many years in terms of how the universe formed. They're starting to discover information saying, hold up, this doesn't fit. So does it challenge current thinking? If it does, allow that, follow that path, and I'll go back to this when we talk about naturalistic decision making. Is it authoritative, or at the very least trustworthy? Now, one of the things in horizon scanning, and one of the things with emerging risk, is all information does not hold the same value. People can write a very eloquent and potentially what looks to be an informative, full of data article, and what you find at the end of the day is they've got an agenda, and that the information has been adapted, statistics have been adapted to tell a story they want to, and it isn't really trustworthy. So as you surface information, one of the things you usually need to be able to do is validate it. Is it trustworthy? And if you can cross-validate information from other sources, you're doing well in horizon scanning. And that's what's going to lead to this strategic intelligence. And the last one, does it pass the so what test? So if we, for example, learn that ice cream sellers are going out in their vans just 4 days a week, is that really significant if we run a big factory and we're talking about putting the whole workforce for our factory on a 4-day week? The fact that an ice cream salesman does it, and you find out that actually it's because he picks children up on a Friday from school. So what is a test of significance that occurs so many times in whatever we do in risk management. I made the point at the bottom there now. If you look at what we're doing, what we're doing is building an information repository to the external context, and that's what's changed in risk management in recent years. We didn't give enough attention to external context, and now we are. And that's why you'll find horizon scanning, the scenario analysis in the new emerging risk standard when it's published, probably Q4 of this year. It might be Q3, but I think it's going to be Q4 now. You'll find those techniques are in there because we need to do better at understanding our external context. Scenario analysis, there's a guide that you'll be able to acquire from us. It's on the portal. It's the perfect partner to horizon scanning because it allows you to make the connections between the stories that the data might be telling you. It also allows you to highlight where there might still be gaps in your data that you want to pick up on. And the one I want to draw is it also highlights discontinuities. So scenarios, good vehicle to make the process inclusive and ultimately deliver the output to your management, that strategic insight. Because you can bring around the data, everybody can say, well, you know what, that doesn't quite fit. Or we don't have this information. And that's where you can take this technology if you can keep that clarity that you get with the scenario. When you look at the scenarios, information, you want to work with 3 horizons. Some information will be in that closed term, that part that we talked about earlier on with the gentleman more on the wall. Put that in your now. In your medium term, something that's going to come up that you need to work to. And then longer term, something that's truly still on the horizon and you don't know when it's going to come to be. And if you structure the information in this way, it'll allow you to focus on that which is most necessary. Of course, longer term, if you sort something longer term that needs a radical change to your business, for example, moving to a 4-day week, you may need to start that process very early. So don't discount everything that's in the longer term as, oh, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, because you might need to build up expertise or start the process of transition, as we are with climate change, much early. We should have done climate change much earlier already. That's the reason for looking at the longer term. So, summary or takeaway points: it's an iterative process. Don't force the process to a fixed outcome. Do research as individuals, teams, and in workshops. But the best results if you use more than one of these. So, use different methods, multi-methods. Don't all follow the same path of looking at the data. Get somebody to look at one path, somebody to look at them, see what emerges between the 2 paths that they've followed. You might see more, you might get more insight out of that. Feel free to use unstructured research, but use a structure to make sure you don't waste resources. And if you're doing horizon scanning, really would expect you to actually be putting that information ultimately when you want to communicate it into scenarios, because they are the ideal way to move on. I just want to talk a little bit about data to insight. The scenarios you can choose: event-based, financial, behavioural, stress tested. So there's a number of scenarios you can use for your data, and they'll bring out a different element of information. So for example, the behavioural one, if you're looking at a 4-day week, that might be a really important scenario. How's it going to change people's behaviour? Is it going to be a long-term change? Is it going to be a short-term change? So pick your scenarios to use with your data very carefully in terms of what you want to draw out of your data. Here's that process that I talked about, thinking of data, information, knowledge, intelligence, and strategic intelligence. Think about that as you build. Where are you on this path? Because that tells you how far down the path you are in terms of the success with horizon scanning. I'm just going to close on this one, really. There's a couple of other sides, but this one's an important one. There's a book I'd recommend. It's Seeing What Others Don't. It's a book by Gary Klein, who's famous for non-deterministic decision-making. How people make decisions naturally. And in that book, he says, look for anchors. An anchor is something that you can drop and pull on. It can take some weight. These are things that are strong facts. And you want coherence between those anchors. Don't overlook things that seem out of place or don't fit with the view of the world. He calls them contradictions. That is an important insight into the fact that you don't have a full picture. If you ignore contradictions, then there's a chance you will have insight which is running in the wrong direction. And they can be small signals, these contradictions. Are there alternative reasons or explanations where you've seen what you've seen? So you might sit down and debate and think, why is that data saying that? It might be an issue of trustworthy, it might be untrustworthy data. You might conclude that the author of the information is not really understanding the issues. And then you can just rule that out as part of your validation. But it might actually be that little gem that you need to see. Give yourself time. You won't be able to create insight on cue. Your brain doesn't work that way. So sometimes you just need to think about stuff. And that was that point of you've seen something that's significant, you capture it, but you don't know why. That's what experts do. It might be you've got an expert in technology, can't explain why they think it, but they've given you some information and allow things to bother you. Crowdsourcing is a technique you can use to pull together information. We use it to actually help develop some strategy with our crowdsourcing tool. That's good because It brings together people's views in an unbiased way. And that's what you want. You want to remove bias. And I've put there a reference to the book that I'm referring to. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. I've left us a couple more minutes than 15 minutes. So Lauren, if you're there, are you going to join us, and then you can pitch some questions if we have any. Thank you.
Hi, Keith. Thank you very much. Yeah, so there are a couple of questions that have come in. So the first one is, do you have any practical examples of where horizon scanning has been implemented into an organisation that has provided safety improvements in an organisation's performance?
Safety improvements, right. Yeah, to be honest, I think I have. I got involved with risk management in the RAL area, and with some of the new RAL developments. Not the clearest example, but what they identified by looking at the problems that they were facing, by forward thinking, by creating foresight, you realise they didn't actually have access to all the skills they needed because the project was that large. Can't name the project. So yes, and part of that is people having the right skills. Go back to that pestle. People having the right skills, the right level of expertise, being in a role where they have authority to check others, is a safety issue. And that's why I say, if you use pestle and look at all these problems from a different perspective, you actually uncover things you wouldn't necessarily think. Because if I look to that, it might be, well, you need to train people. It's a training issue. Move on. But don't. Take a step backwards. Have a look at that in its context. How would that change behaviour? So we've got training. What do we need to train them in? What are there new techniques that are going to be used in delivering this rail line that weren't used before? And what might we need to do? Where might this end up? How might people's behaviours change in that technique? Give you a good example out of a technology one is actually with mobile phones, when the text message. That was just a byproduct of a mobile phone, but look how it mushroomed into one of the most popular ways that we communicate. So that's my answer to that one. Use pestle, look at different ways. It's a system issue.
Thank you, Keith. And the next question is, what is the best way to communicate findings from horizon scanning within my organisation?
Scenarios, most definitely. And if you download, first thing you'll download our guide on scenarios, which we published recently. I won't name the organisation, it's on the document, but you can get that from our portal. Because scenarios are little stories. You don't have to create a huge scenario to communicate something. What you do is you join in up the stories. And as I said in my presentation, you can pick a different scenario. It might be event-based. If the question you're trying to answer is, where is the next generation of let's use a safety one. What's going to be the next generation of safety in roads, because we've got all these automatic vehicles? Nobody knows. That's a horizon scanning situation. So you start to pull together information through that area, and then you start to see that actually what you've got to do is you've got to get people's behaviors to change, and you've got to get technology companies to put in certain safeties, and you start to see that the vehicles themselves have got to be designed differently so that they can actually see pedestrians, animals, wildlife in easier. It might be that we fundamentally have to redesign the car. And then you can put those together in an event scenario. It might only just be a couple of pages. It could be a mind map that you take your people through. There are a lot of choices, but I go back to the idea of scenarios, and it's not in the document we publish, but you can actually draw across a vertical and a horizontal axis and label them up. Technology comes in, technology doesn't come in. People's behavior changes, people's behavior doesn't change on a cross. And then you can fill in each of those different segments with what the consequences may be, or what the steps that you need to take are, because you believe that might be a plausible future. So you have to invest in that area. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, and then I think the last one, unless there's any more that come in, is so you spoke about how to do horizon scanning and the gathering of the data. If you've got any examples of methods to do this, for example, would workshops within my organisation and with fellow colleagues be suitable?
Yes, but avoid groupthink. With horizon scanning, it's nice to have that independent view, but I did also say about crowdsourcing as a technique. So yes, you can use workshops. Yes, you can send people off with individuals and see what information comes back. Bearing in mind, you're looking for someone to get small signals. I'll give you an example for crowdsourcing. I got involved in an exercise looking at obesity, which is a growing problem in America. And we set different teams off to look at different aspects of obesity. Now, me making the assumptions, it was going to be about foods that make you fat because of their fat content. One team come at it, and I was looking at, no, it's some of the things we put in there, the ultra processed things that come in there, which is big stuff now. People are talking a lot about ultra processed, but this is the first time I'd seen it some time ago. Talking about the bits that are put into foods to make them right on the palate or taste nice or to make you have a second. They can change your body chemistry such that you consume more than you should, and that's how you become obese. And that was completely left field. If we'd done it in a workshop, we might have all gone down groupthink and it's all about foods that contain too much fat. So I do always emphasize use a number of different techniques. Don't rule out having a workshop. Don't rule out crowdsourcing. Don't rule out individual desk-based or even sending people off to do some research in a different organization. They're all valid areas that you can use for your horizon scanning. All add to that strategic intelligence, which the board can use to get insight. I'll make one more point. Remember that risk management, and this is all going to sound quite highfalutin, it's a game of asymmetric information. Now, I'll put that in simple terms. Do you know more than the next person so that you can invest better, wiser, and therefore take the market? That's what we're doing. Asymmetric information. The more information we can collect, valid information, the better off we are. Okay.
Thank you, Keith. And I hope that's answered everybody's questions. I haven't seen any more come in, so I'm going to take that everybody is happy. And yeah, thank you very much, Keith, for coming along and speaking today. It's been really great, and I hope that everybody's enjoyed. And thank you all very much for attending.
Well, it's always a privilege to have people attend your webinar. So I'd like to thank the people that took time out today to come to this webinar. And I hope I've shared something that gets them thinking. And I'm always happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Keith. And yeah, thanks everybody. As Keith touched on earlier, the recording will be available both on Barnett Waddingham's platform and also on RSM. So yeah, you'll be able to access this afterwards. Thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Bye now.